There's a special delivery on its way to Russia. It's about the size of a baguette, but the filling is far from tasty. There are no deli meats or spicy meatballs in this delivery, just explosive firepower that serves as the warhead on a small rocket that has been designed to become Europe's first line of defense against Russia's drone attacks. This new weapon looks more like a scale model of a rocket than an actual missile, but it's set to cause serious problems for Vladimir Putin and his ambitions in Europe. The rocket is a product of Estonia, and this is why Estonia's tiny missile is set to become Russia's massive problem. On November 10th, The Telegraph reported on a recent display of a special kind of missile. Held in the hands of Kusti Salm, who is the chief executive of Frankenburg Technologies, the rocket measures just 25.6 inches across and has been dubbed the Mark I. And for Putin, this tiny weapon, which looks more like a model of a traditional rocket rather than a fully functioning weapon, is an absolute nightmare. Why? Well, it offers Ukraine and Europe a countermeasure to Russia's long-range drones. The rocket in Salm's hand was actually a foam replica of what Frankenburg Technologies has created, but the real missile is being developed and is very close to being ready to come to Europe's defense. Salm unveiled the missile in the Estonian capital city of Tallinn, and he was very quick to tell The Telegraph that he's very proud of what he has in his hands. "We are not apologetic about the fact that we manufacture weapons," Salm tells the outlet. "We are not afraid to say that we are manufacturing them to take down Russia's long-range drones," he adds, before concluding, "and we are not at all apologetic about the fact that this will be the most needed capability in the Western world in the next 5 to 10 years. He may be right. If the name Mark I seems familiar, it's because this baguette-sized missile isn't a brand new concept. Rumors of its existence have been circulating since the end of 2024, and it's from reports dated to December of that year that we can start to get an idea of what this new Estonian weapon can do. On December 6, 2024, Defense Express reported that Frankenburg Technologies was engaging in the initial tests of its new missile, which the outlet claimed would be an anti-aircraft weapon. At the time, not a whole lot was known about the Mark I. Defense Express reported that Frankenburg Technologies already had plans to produce several dozen of its new rockets per week, and that it aimed to increase that number to several hundred by the fall of 2025. As for the rocket's capabilities, its main feature was an artificial intelligence system that the company said would enable its new missile to acquire and lock onto targets with minimal human intervention. The concept was simple. If an aerial assault began, hordes of Mark I rockets could be launched to automatically destroy incoming threats. Beyond that, most of Defense Express's reports speculated on what the Mark I brings to the table. Its logic ran that the new Estonian missile is about a third of the size of a Stinger missile, which suggests that it also packs a third of the firepower. Estimates of the missile's range fell in the 1.2-mile range, and the outlet suggested the Mark I may have a 1.1-pound warhead. It's not a lot, but it's enough explosive firepower to take out the drones that Russia is launching against Ukraine. And it was to Ukraine that the Mark I went first. Also in December 2024, United 24 Media said that Frankenburg Technologies was planning to combat test its new missile under real battlefield conditions in Ukraine. That's a departure from the norm. Typically, weapons manufacturers test their products in controlled testing environments. However, a test in Ukraine would provide far more data to enable Frankenburg Technologies to refine its design. For Ukraine, being used as a testing ground for this particular weapon made sense. The Mark I's autonomous nature means that Ukraine wouldn't have to dedicate a lot of resources to getting it in the air. All it had to do was launch, and the Mark I, assuming it worked correctly, would do the rest. We don't have any specific results for these early tests, but the fact that Salm is showcasing his company's new missile for The Telegraph almost a year later suggests that the Mark I is at least combat viable. What we do know is that Frankenburg Technologies is moving toward mass production, and that it's constantly tweaking its new missile to make it even more effective. As The Telegraph reports, this isn't a missile that's designed to operate in all conditions. The Mark I would struggle to function in the heat of the desert or chill of the Arctic Circle, the outlet claims. But that isn't the point of the weapon. The Mark I is supposed to provide its users with affordable mass, which is a concept we'll explore later in the video. The main point here is that the Mark I doesn't need to be great. It just needs to be good and cheap enough. Right now, the missile isn't quite there. Salm says that its goal is to get the Mark I to the point where it hits its target 90% of the time. Right now, the missile is at 56%, which isn't too bad for a rocket that may cost as little as $52,700 to build. Salm certainly thinks that a 56% success rate is enough to justify moving into mass production. And he says that Frankenburg Technologies has set up factories in a pair of NATO member nations that will collectively end up producing hundreds of these cheap missiles every single day. Salm's previous goal was to hit that number weekly. It seems that the Mark I is ahead of schedule, at least when it comes to production. Still, more work is needed to turn the missile from a brilliant concept that almost works into a missile that will be the true threat to the evolving Russian approach to warfare. Figuring out how to cram the sensors, fuel, and warhead that all need to be fit into the Mark I's tiny frame has been a challenge, and it's one that's likely affecting the Mark I's accuracy. As the Telegraph notes, a tiny rocket burning through its fuel reserves starts to tilt at a different angle than intended due to the weight issues caused by the fuel disappearing. Salm says that Frankenburg Technologies is getting ahead of these issues, as his company has worked on getting the shape, positioning of the wings, and the center of gravity, center of pressure, all of these things, right, to make sure the new rocket is as accurate as possible. If Putin takes the Mark I's 56% success rate as a good sign, he should also know that Frankenburg Technology isn't messing around when it comes to this experimentation. The Telegraph says that the company has hired some of the world's leading engineers to get its new missile up to par, with one of those engineers being Andreas Buppert. He was one of the main minds behind the Iris-T air defense system, and he's been joined by the chief engineer who worked on the UK's Spear 3 missile. Those engineers have been joined by what Salm calls a team of Latvian geniuses who are pooling their expertise and experience together to come up with solutions. Frankenburg Technologies has the talent. As Salm puts it, when everyone has a big question mark on their face because no one knows what's going on, the one guy with 30 years experience, for example, remembers a trial he did in 2006 that revealed there was a small issue with a bolt that had a crack, and it's the same here. Whatever faults the Mark I has are now being ironed out quickly, and the missile stands poised to deliver many a bite-sized blow to Putin's ambitions. And that brings us nicely to why the Mark I is going to become the thing of Putin's nightmares. It all comes down to what the missile will be targeting once it's been deployed: Russia's Shahid-like drones. Ever since Russia started building its own Shahid types after initially just buying the drones from Iran, they've become one of the most important weapons in Russia's arsenal. Putin knows this, and he has made building as many of these long-range drones as possible a key priority for Russia. Back in January 2024, Reuters reported that the Russian news agency TASS had stated that Russia planned to build up to 32,000 drones per year by 2030. At the time, this was a substantial number, as the former First Deputy Prime Minister of Russia and now its Defense Minister, Andrei Belyusov, pointed out. The annual production volume of unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, excluding educational UAVs, is planned at 32,500 units, Belyusov said in 2024. This is almost 3 times higher than current production volumes. At the same time, it's planned that the share of Russian UAVs will make up 70% of the market in this type of UAV. These numbers seemed big at the time. Now they're almost quaint. In the nearly 2 years since that proclamation, Russia has expanded its long-range drone production dramatically. By August 2025, the Kyiv Independent was reporting that Russia planned to build 79,000 Shahid-type drones by the end of 2025 alone, which is more than double the annual target stated in January 2024. The sharp increase came as Russia realized that it could inflict a ton of damage on Ukraine through sheer numbers of drones. That damage doesn't always have to be the result of direct hits on Ukraine's cities and infrastructure. Simply having so many aerial threats fired at Ukraine simultaneously puts a huge strain on Ukraine's air defenses. Even if every drone is taken out, that still amounts to the loss of missiles, interceptor drones, and whatever other technology Ukraine uses to counter Russia's Shahid types. If it's not Ukraine's cities and energy facilities that burn thanks to these massive numbers of drones, it's the country's collective bank balance. A month after the Kyiv Independent's report, Australia's ABC News reported that Russia has ramped up production again. The Russian goal now seems to be to get to the point where it can send 2,000 drones into Ukraine in a single day. That's according to Christian Freuding of Germany's Ministry of Defense, who warned in September that Russia might be ready to hit these numbers as early as November 2025. In other words, right now. Russia hasn't launched a single attack on Ukraine that involves 2,000 drones, though it has launched around 700 or 800 Shahid types in a single day on several occasions. That's bad news for Ukraine because it means that Russia has been increasing the sheer size of its aerial assaults in line with its scaling of production. Metza offers the numbers in a November 4th article, where it says that Russia launched 44,000 Shahid-type drones at Ukraine during the first 10 months of 2025. That breaks down to 4,400 drones per month, or about 146 drones per day. Of course, Russia isn't launching drones at Ukraine every single day. Instead, it attacks Ukraine once or twice per week with several hundred drones at a time. That won't mean much to Ukraine as it deals with the fact that Russia has increased the number of Shahid types it's sending into Ukrainian airspace by 303% in 2025 compared to its 2024 numbers. Ukraine is also increasingly struggling with these massive hordes of drones, ABC reports. It says that Ukraine managed to shoot down about 64% of the drones Russia sent during the first 10 months of 2025, which is lower than its 68% shoot-down rate from 2024. Ukraine is paying the price for Russia's drone-heavy offensive in civilian blood, too. At least 494 Ukrainian civilians have died in drone strikes between January and September 2025, ABC reports the UN monitoring mission as stating. It's into this situation that the Mark I may soon be ready to enter. Ukraine is crying out for a cheap solution to the Russian drone problem. If Frankenburg Technologies works out the kinks in the current version of the Mark I, and especially if the company hits its 90% hit rate target, the new Estonian mini-missile could be just what Ukraine is looking for. An autonomous weapon that can be unleashed en masse to deal with Russia's drone hordes will help Ukraine tremendously as Russia keeps pushing for higher Shahid-type production. Of course, the Mark I's usefulness isn't limited to Ukraine. That is the country with the most immediate need, but Putin has spent the last few months reminding NATO's European members that there are also targets for Russia. Russia's drones could become a European problem rather than just a Ukrainian one sooner rather than later. You could even argue they're already a problem as Russia is getting bolder with its drone incursions that seem designed to tweak the collective nose of NATO while testing its capabilities and responses in Europe. On November 5th, Reuters published an article in which it claimed that Russia's new hybrid war tactic of invading the airspace of NATO's European members is already putting European air defenses to the test. The outlet highlighted several examples, starting with the headline incursion of over 20 Russian drones into Polish airspace in early September. Poland dealt with those drones by scrambling fighter jets, which is a problem in its own right, as you'll discover in a moment. Since that Polish incursion, Russia has sent fighter jets into Estonia's airspace, again causing NATO to scramble its own fighter jets. In Belgium, Russian drones have closed down several airports, with more UAVs also being sighted loitering near military bases. The Czech Republic has also cited an increasing number of drone incidents near its military bases. Denmark is dealing with drones near its airports, and Lithuania is also being threatened with military aircraft and helium balloons entering its airspace. These aren't all of the examples of what Russia has been doing with its drones and aerial assets during the last few months. However, they're enough to make the point. Russia is sending the message that its drones can reach far and wide into Europe. According to the Centre for European Policy Analysis, NATO's northern European members alone recorded at least 38 instances of aerial incidents between September and early October 2025, which are most likely connected to Russia. There have been many more since, and Europe is facing up to the likely fact that it's facing a Russian drone problem that will only get worse if Putin succeeds in Ukraine. But as with Ukraine, the Mark I may offer a solution. Why? There are two reasons. A moment ago we told you that Poland's scrambling of fighter jets to deal with Russian drones was a problem. As a show of force and fast reactions, those jets are great, but the Telegraph highlights the major flaw in this approach. They fired missiles worth around £500,000, or about $658,000, to intercept Shahid drones each worth less than a tenth of that, and failed in half the attempts, the outlet says of the NATO response to the Poland incursion. It does not take a military strategist to work out that this is not a sustainable exchange. It certainly doesn't, and it's here where the Mark I's low cost comes into play. If Salm and his team can hit the 90% accuracy target mentioned earlier, the whole of Europe gets access to a new missile that costs a tenth of the firepower NATO used to tackle just 20 Russian drones. Bear in mind that the Kyiv Independent estimates that each of Russia's Shahid types, named Geran drones in Russia, costs between $20,000 and $50,000 to build. Granted, that means that 20 drones in Poland cost between $400,000 and $1 million to deploy, but that's still not a great return on investment for NATO. If Mark I can cut its drone response costs by a tenth, that's huge news. It also moves NATO closer to achieving a concept that we mentioned close to the beginning of this video: affordable mass. The concept behind affordable mass is remarkably simple. As the National Defense magazine points out, the idea is to create scalable and adaptable systems that can be produced in the tens of thousands without bankrupting the nation using those systems. In other words, NATO nations need to be able to get their hands on thousands of cheap missiles that can take out Russian drones, rather than relying on expensive and highly precise missiles carried by its fighter jets. This isn't a future problem for Europe to overcome. Way back in 2023, Forbes senior contributor Lauren Thompson was pointing out that affordable mass is an urgent military need that can't wait for a new generation of smart munitions. Interestingly, the Mark I is a smart munition thanks to its use of artificial intelligence, but Thompson's point about how the world's militaries aren't equipped with the types of weapons that need to deal with drone hordes still stands. Advanced weapons, as important as they are in many other aspects, aren't the right choice for dealing with cheap drones. Affordable mass weapons, such as the Mark I, are. And as United 24 Media noted in an October report, Frankenburg Technologies is far from the only company working on the affordable mass challenge. If anything, the Mark I may be the first of many affordable mass weapons that allow NATO members to create custom aerial defenses based on their specific needs. The outlet reports that Sweden has unveiled its own mini-missile that's even cheaper than the Mark I at just $5,000 per unit. The Kreuger 100 doesn't come loaded with a warhead, as it uses kinetic impact to destroy incoming drones, but it does have onboard artificial intelligence that allows it to track and take out targets, just like the Mark I. So what we're seeing in Estonia's new weapon is one of the more impressive examples of a defense industry trend that is sweeping Europe. Affordable anti-drone technology that costs very little and can be deployed in massive numbers is supplanting the advanced missiles and rockets the collective West has spent decades developing. When those new weapons operate autonomously, as the Mark I does, then even better. That means less training is required for the weapon's use, and it means that Putin's drone